Question 1. The assessment process reveals that a Utah Concealed Firearm Permit (CFP) holder is stopped for a minor traffic violation. During the stop, the law enforcement officer asks if the individual is carrying any weapons. The permit holder is indeed carrying a concealed firearm. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the permit holder? Option A. Attempt to subtly move the firearm to a less accessible location within the vehicle to avoid drawing attention to it. Option B. State that they are not carrying any weapons, hoping the officer will not discover the firearm. Option C. Calmly inform the officer that they are carrying a concealed firearm and await further instructions. Option D. Immediately reach for the firearm to present it to the officer without being asked. The correct answer is C. Calmly inform the officer that they are carrying a concealed firearm and await further instructions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to navigate the nuances of Utah's concealed firearm laws while also considering the ethical implications of their actions in a public space. The core challenge lies in balancing the legal right to carry a concealed firearm with the responsibility to act in a manner that does not create undue alarm or violate public order, especially when interacting with law enforcement. Misinterpreting the legal requirements or acting impulsively can lead to serious legal consequences and compromise public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves immediately and calmly complying with the officer's lawful commands, clearly stating the presence of the firearm, and following all instructions regarding its handling. This approach is correct because Utah law, specifically Utah Code Annotated Section 76-10-523, requires a permit holder to disclose the fact that they are carrying a concealed firearm to a peace officer upon request. Furthermore, ethical considerations and general safety protocols dictate that cooperation with law enforcement during a traffic stop is paramount. This minimizes risk to all parties involved and demonstrates responsible firearm ownership. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves attempting to conceal the firearm further or denying its presence. This is a direct violation of Utah Code Annotated Section 76-10-523, which mandates disclosure to a peace officer. It also creates a dangerous situation for the officer, potentially escalating the encounter and leading to severe legal penalties for the permit holder. Another incorrect approach is to become defensive or argumentative with the officer about the reason for the stop or the legality of carrying the firearm. A citizen has rights. A traffic stop is a lawful encounter, and resisting or obstructing an officer is a criminal offense. This approach escalates the situation unnecessarily and demonstrates a lack of judgment and respect for the law enforcement process. A third incorrect approach is to reach for the firearm without being instructed to do so. This is extremely dangerous and could be misinterpreted by the officer as a hostile action, leading to a potentially tragic outcome. Utah law, while permitting concealed carry, does not grant permit holders the right to unilaterally decide when and how to present their firearm during an interaction with law enforcement. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes de-escalation, clear communication, and strict adherence to legal requirements. This involves remaining calm, being truthful and forthcoming with law enforcement, and following all lawful instructions. Understanding the specific disclosure requirements under Utah law is critical. In any interaction with law enforcement, especially when carrying a firearm, the primary goal should be to ensure the safety of oneself, the officer, and the public, while upholding legal obligations. Question 2. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a Utah Concealed Firearm Permit holder is confronted by an individual who is verbally aggressive and making vague threats while maintaining a distance of approximately 15 feet. The individual is not physically lunging or displaying a weapon. What is the most appropriate course of action for the permit holder? Option A. Maintain a safe distance, verbally de-escalate if possible, and disengage from the confrontation if a safe opportunity arises, without drawing or displaying their firearm. Option B. Immediately attempt to physically subdue the aggressor to prevent any potential escalation, using their firearm only if absolutely necessary. Option C. Draw their firearm and verbally warn the aggressor to back away as the threats create an imminent danger. Option D. Engage verbally with the aggressor to understand the source of their anger and attempt to resolve the dispute through negotiation, even if it means closing the distance. The correct answer is A. Maintain a safe distance, verbally de-escalate if possible, and disengage from the confrontation if a safe opportunity arises, without drawing or displaying their firearm. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to balance their right to self-defense with the legal obligations and responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed firearm in Utah. Core challenge lies in accurately assessing a situation to determine if the use of deadly force is legally justified and ethically sound, while also considering the potential consequences of any action or inaction. Misjudgment can lead to severe legal repercussions, including criminal charges and ethical compromise. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough and objective assessment of the immediate threat to life or serious bodily harm. This means evaluating the totality of circumstances, including the aggressor's actions, intent, capability, and proximity, as well as the defender's ability to retreat or de-escalate. In Utah, the legal standard for justified use of deadly force is high, requiring an honest and reasonable belief that such force is necessary to prevent death or serious bodily injury to oneself or another. This approach prioritizes adherence to Utah Code Section 76-2-402, which outlines the justifiable use of force, and the principles of responsible firearm ownership, emphasizing that carrying a concealed firearm is a privilege that demands careful judgment and adherence to the law. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves reacting solely based on fear or perceived threat without a concrete, imminent danger of death or serious bodily harm. This fails to meet the legal threshold for justified use of force in Utah, potentially leading to unlawful assault or homicide charges. It also violates the ethical responsibility to use deadly force only as a last resort. Another incorrect approach is to assume that because one possesses a concealed firearm permit, CFP in Utah, they are automatically justified in using their firearm in any confrontational situation. This misunderstands the purpose of the CFP, which is to permit concealed carry, not to grant carte blanche for offensive or preemptive use of force. It disregards the legal requirement for a justifiable threat. A further incorrect approach is to escalate a verbal dispute or minor confrontation into a physical one by brandishing or threatening to use a firearm. This is not only illegal but also ethically reprehensible, as it transforms a potentially manageable situation into a life-threatening one, directly contradicting the principles of responsible gun ownership and self-defense. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a calm and objective assessment of the situation. This involves identifying the nature and imminence of any threat. They must then consider their legal obligations under Utah law, specifically the statutes governing the use of force. Ethical considerations, such as the duty to retreat when safely possible and the principle of using the minimum force necessary, should also guide their actions. If a threat is imminent and legally justifiable, the response should be proportionate and aimed at neutralizing the threat, not inflicting punishment or acting out of anger. Continuous training and a deep understanding of relevant laws are crucial for making sound judgments in high-stress situations. Question 3. Benchmark analysis indicates that a Utah Concealed Firearm Permit (CFP) holder is traveling through Salt Lake City and needs to attend a brief non-criminal court hearing. The CFP holder is aware that they possess a valid CFP. Considering Utah law, what is the most prudent course of action regarding their concealed firearm? Option A. Carry the firearm concealed into the courthouse, believing their CFP exempts them from any location-specific restrictions. Option B. Avoid carrying the firearm altogether and leave it at home to prevent any potential legal complications. Option C. Securely store the firearm in a locker or designated safe storage area within the courthouse if available. Option D. Leave the firearm secured in their vehicle parked in a public parking lot near the courthouse. The correct answer is D. Leave the firearm secured in their vehicle parked in a public parking lot near the courthouse. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to navigate the intersection of personal rights, public safety, and legal obligations in Utah. The core challenge lies in understanding the nuances of Utah's concealed firearm laws, specifically the requirements for a concealed firearm permit (CFP), and the circumstances under which carrying a concealed firearm is permissible or prohibited, even for permit holders. Misinterpreting these laws can lead to serious legal consequences, including criminal charges and the revocation of permit privileges. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with Utah Code Title 76, Chapter 10, Part 5, which governs firearms. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves understanding that, while Utah law generally permits concealed carry for CFP holders, there are specific locations where firearms are prohibited, regardless of permit status. This approach prioritizes adherence to the explicit restrictions outlined in Utah Code. Specifically, Utah Code 76-10-504. 5 prohibits carrying a firearm in a secure area of a courthouse, a correctional facility, a secure area of a law enforcement facility, a polling place during an election, or a restricted area of an airport. Therefore, a CFP holder must be aware of and respect these designated no-carry zones to maintain legal compliance and public safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that having a CFP grants unrestricted concealed carry privileges throughout Utah. This fails to acknowledge the statutory limitations placed on permit holders, such as those concerning courthouses and correctional facilities. This approach violates Utah Code 76-10-504. 5. By disregarding explicit prohibitions. Another incorrect approach is to believe that ignorance of a specific prohibited location absolves one of responsibility. The law places the onus on the permit holder to be aware of and comply with all restrictions. Claiming ignorance does not negate the legal requirement to refrain from carrying a firearm in prohibited areas, as defined by Utah Code. A further incorrect approach is to rely solely on personal discretion or perceived threat assessment to determine where carrying a concealed firearm is acceptable. While situational awareness is important, it cannot override the specific legal prohibitions established by the Utah legislature. This approach risks violating the law by carrying in a location that is statutorily off-limits, irrespective of the immediate perceived danger. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Utah seeking to carry a concealed firearm must adopt a proactive and informed approach. This involves thoroughly studying and understanding the Utah Code pertaining to firearms and concealed carry, particularly Title 76, Chapter 10, Part 5. They should prioritize obtaining and maintaining a valid CFP, and critically, they must commit to memorizing and respecting all statutory restrictions on where firearms can be carried, even with a permit. This includes regularly reviewing any updates to the law. When in doubt about the legality of carrying in a specific location, the professional decision-making process dictates erring on the side of caution and choosing not to carry the firearm in that location. Question 4. Governance review demonstrates that a Utah resident who previously had a misdemeanor conviction for disorderly conduct 5 years ago and has since completed all court-ordered requirements is considering applying for a concealed firearm permit, CFP. The resident is unsure if this past conviction, despite its resolution, impacts their eligibility. What is the most prudent and legally compliant course of action for this individual to determine their eligibility for a CFP in Utah? Option A. Rely on advice from an online firearms forum where other users with similar past convictions have reportedly obtained their CFP without issue. Option B. Submit the application and disclose the conviction, but do not seek any further clarification, trusting that the BCI will make the final determination based solely on the disclosed information. Option C. Proactively consult with an attorney specializing in firearms law or contact the Utah Bureau of Criminal Identification, BCI, directly to clarify how the specific misdemeanor conviction and its resolution are addressed under Utah Code Title 76, Chapter 10, Part 5, before submitting an application. Option D. Assume that since the conviction was a misdemeanor and all requirements were met, it will not affect their CFP eligibility, and proceed with submitting the application immediately. The correct answer is C. Proactively consult with an attorney specializing in firearms law or contact the Utah Bureau of Criminal Identification, BCI, directly to clarify how the specific misdemeanor conviction and its resolution are addressed under Utah Code Title 76, Chapter 10, Part 5, before submitting an application. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the intersection of personal beliefs and legal obligations concerning firearm possession and carrying. The challenge lies in understanding the specific requirements of Utah law for a concealed firearm permit, CFP, and how those requirements interact with an individual's personal circumstances, particularly when those circumstances might be perceived as impacting their ability to safely and responsibly carry a firearm. The individual must make a judgment call that balances their right to self-defense with their legal duty to comply with permit regulations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough and honest self-assessment against the explicit criteria outlined in Utah Code Title 76, Chapter 10, Part 5, Firearms. Specifically, the applicant must verify they meet all the eligibility requirements, which include age, residency, and crucially, the absence of disqualifying factors such as certain criminal convictions, mental health adjudications, or documented patterns of domestic violence. If the individual has any doubt about their eligibility due to past legal or mental health issues, the most responsible and legally compliant action is to consult with an attorney specializing in firearms law or directly contact the Utah Bureau of Criminal Identification, BCI, for clarification on their specific situation before submitting an application. This proactive approach ensures that the application is made with full awareness of potential disqualifications and avoids misrepresentation or the submission of a frivolous application, which could have legal repercussions. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that because a past legal issue was resolved or a mental health concern was treated, it automatically disqualifies them from obtaining a CFP. While resolution is important, specific legal statutes and BCI interpretations dictate whether certain past events are permanently disqualifying or require specific documentation to demonstrate rehabilitation or current fitness. Ignoring the need for specific verification and proceeding with an application without understanding these nuances is a failure to comply with the spirit and letter of the law. Another incorrect approach is to believe that personal circumstances, such as a recent stressful life event or a perceived minor infraction that did not result in a formal charge, have no bearing on CFP eligibility. Utah law and the application process requires disclosure of information that could potentially impact an individual's fitness to carry a concealed firearm. Failing to consider how such events might be interpreted by the BCI, or failing to disclose them if they fall under disclosure requirements, constitutes a misrepresentation or omission, which is a direct violation of the application process and Utah Code. A further incorrect approach is to rely solely on anecdotal advice from friends or online forums regarding CFP eligibility. While these sources may offer general information, they do not substitute for the specific legal requirements and interpretations provided by the Utah BCI or legal counsel. Making decisions based on incomplete or inaccurate information can lead to an application being denied and potentially create future barriers to obtaining a permit. This demonstrates a failure to engage in due diligence and adhere to the official regulatory framework. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying the specific legal requirements of the jurisdiction, Utah Code Title 76, Chapter 10, Part 5. 2. Conducting a thorough and honest self-assessment against those requirements, paying particular attention to any potential disqualifying factors. 3. Seeking authoritative clarification from the relevant regulatory body, Utah BCI, or qualified legal counsel when any doubt exists about eligibility or disclosure obligations. 4. Acting with transparency and accuracy in all interactions with the regulatory process. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, legally sound, and ethically responsible. Question 5. Cost-benefit analysis shows that carrying a concealed firearm can provide a sense of security, but Utah law strictly defines the circumstances under which a concealed firearm permit, CFP, holder may carry a weapon. If a CFP holder in Salt Lake City feels a persistent sense of being watched and uneasy while walking through a public park, but observes no specific individuals acting suspiciously, no overt threats, no immediate physical danger, what is the most appropriate course of action according to Utah's concealed firearm regulations? Option A. Draw and display the firearm to deter any potential aggressor, as the feeling of being watched suggests a credible threat is imminent. Option B. Immediately leave the park and report a vague feeling of unease to park authorities, assuming the feeling indicates a high probability of future danger. Option C. Continue to scan the surroundings and prepare to use the firearm if the feeling of being watched intensifies, even without concrete evidence of a threat. Option D. Assess the situation based on observable facts and whether they meet the legal definition of imminent danger, refraining from drawing or displaying the firearm unless such a danger becomes objectively apparent. Correct answer is D. Assess the situation based on observable facts and whether they meet the legal definition of imminent danger, refraining from drawing or displaying the firearm unless such a danger becomes objectively apparent. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to balance personal beliefs and perceived threats with the strict legal requirements for carrying a concealed firearm in Utah. The challenge lies in interpreting the legal definition of imminent danger and applying it to a situation that may be influenced by personal anxiety or past experiences, rather than an immediate, observable threat. Misinterpreting the legal standard can lead to serious legal consequences, including the revocation of a concealed firearm permit, CFP, and potential criminal charges. Careful judgment is required to differentiate between a genuine, legally recognized threat and a subjective feeling of unease. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to Utah Code Title 76, Chapter 10, Part 5, which governs concealed firearm permits and the circumstances under which a firearm may be carried. Specifically, Utah law defines imminent danger as a situation where there is a clear and present threat of death or serious bodily injury. This requires an objective assessment of the circumstances, not merely a subjective feeling of fear. Therefore, the correct approach is to assess the situation based on observable facts and whether they meet the legal threshold for imminent danger, rather than acting solely on a feeling of being watched or a general sense of unease. This aligns with the legal framework that permits concealed carry for self-defense against immediate threats, not for preemptive action based on speculation. Incorrect approach is analysis. Acting on a general feeling of being watched or a vague sense of unease, without any specific, observable threat, constitutes a failure to meet the legal standard for imminent danger. This approach is ethically and legally flawed because it relies on subjective interpretation rather than objective evidence, which is the cornerstone of legal justification for using deadly force or carrying a concealed weapon in a manner that could be perceived as threatening. Such an action could be interpreted as carrying a concealed firearm with intent to commit a crime or as brandishing a weapon, both of which are violations of Utah law. Furthermore, allowing personal anxiety to dictate actions when no immediate threat exists undermines the responsible and lawful carrying of firearms, potentially eroding public trust and safety. Relying on past negative experiences without current, concrete evidence of danger also fails to meet the legal standard, as the law focuses on the present circumstances. Professional reasoning. Professionals in situations involving potential threats and the carrying of firearms must adopt a decision-making framework rooted in objective assessment and legal compliance. This involves 1. Identifying and evaluating observable facts, what specific actions or circumstances are present that indicate a threat. 2. Consulting legal standards. Does the situation meet the legal definition of imminent danger as defined by Utah law? 3. Prioritizing de-escalation and avoidance. Are there non-violent means to address the situation? 4. Seeking assistance. If a threat is credible but not immediately life-threatening, is it appropriate to contact law enforcement? 5. Understanding consequences. What are the legal ramifications of acting or not acting? This framework emphasizes a measured, evidence-based approach that respects both individual rights and public safety, ensuring that actions are legally justifiable and ethically sound. Question 6. Implementation of a new personal safety strategy in Utah involves an individual who wishes to carry a handgun for self-defense. This individual has recently moved to Utah from another state and is unsure about the specific requirements for carrying a concealed firearm within Utah. They have heard that Utah has a concealed firearm permit, CFP, but are also aware of general rights to self-defense. Considering Utah's specific firearm regulations, what is the most prudent course of action for this individual regarding carrying a concealed handgun while they are in the process of understanding Utah's laws? Option A. Immediately cease carrying the firearm concealed until a valid Utah CFP is obtained. Option B. Continue carrying the firearm concealed, relying on general self-defense rights and the Second Amendment. Option C. Carry the firearm concealed using a permit from their previous state of residence, assuming it is valid. Option D. Carry the firearm openly, as this is generally permitted without a permit in Utah. Correct answer is A. Immediately cease carrying the firearm concealed until a valid Utah CFP is obtained. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a direct conflict between a citizen's right to self-defense and the specific legal requirements for carrying a concealed firearm in Utah. The individual's belief about their right to carry, while understandable, must be tempered by a thorough understanding of Utah's Concealed Firearm Permit (CFP) laws. Misinterpreting or disregarding these laws can lead to serious legal consequences, including criminal charges and the revocation of any permit. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with the law while respecting individual rights. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice in this situation is to immediately cease carrying the firearm concealed until the individual has obtained a valid Utah CFP. This approach directly addresses the legal requirements stipulated by Utah law for carrying a concealed firearm. Utah Code Section 76-10-504, 1, clearly states that a person may not carry a concealed dangerous weapon without a permit. By ceasing to carry concealed, the individual avoids violating this statute. This action prioritizes legal compliance and public safety, demonstrating a commitment to responsible firearm ownership and adherence to the established regulatory framework for concealed carry in Utah. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to continue carrying the firearm concealed, believing that the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, or a general understanding of self-defense rights, supersedes Utah's specific permitting requirements. This fails to recognize that state laws, such as Utah's CFP requirements, are the operative regulations governing concealed carry within the state. The Second Amendment protects the right to bear arms, but this right is subject to reasonable regulation by the states. Continuing to carry concealed without a permit directly violates Utah Code Section 76-10-504, 1, and demonstrates a disregard for the established legal framework. Another incorrect approach is to assume that a permit from another state, if held, automatically grants the right to carry concealed in Utah. While Utah has reciprocity agreements with some states, these agreements are specific and require verification. Without confirming that the individual's out-of-state permit is recognized under Utah's reciprocity laws, carrying concealed based on that permit alone is a violation of Utah law. This approach ignores the specific jurisdictional requirements of Utah and the need for explicit recognition of out-of-state permits. A further incorrect approach is to carry the firearm openly, believing this circumvents the need for a CFP. While Utah law generally permits open carry without a permit in many locations, there are specific restrictions and prohibitions on open carry, particularly in certain sensitive places. Furthermore, the individual's intent was to carry concealed, and switching to open carry without understanding all applicable open carry laws and restrictions does not resolve the underlying issue of carrying a firearm in a manner that may be legally problematic. The focus remains on the individual's desire to carry a firearm, and without a CFP, their options for carrying concealed are legally restricted. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and accurate information. This involves 1. Identifying the specific legal requirements of the relevant jurisdiction, in this case, Utah's CFP laws. 2. Understanding the rights and responsibilities associated with firearm ownership and carry. 3. Seeking authoritative information regarding permits, reciprocity, and applicable statutes. 4. Acting in a manner that ensures adherence to all legal mandates, even if it means temporarily forgoing a desired action until full compliance is achieved. This proactive approach minimizes legal risk and upholds professional standards of conduct. Question 7. To address the challenge of a concealed firearm permit holder in Utah observing two individuals engaged in what appears to be a heated argument in a public park, with one individual making aggressive gestures, what is the most prudent and legally sound course of action? Option A. Immediately draw your concealed firearm and verbally confront the individuals to de-escalate the situation. Option B. Maintain a safe distance. Observe the situation discreetly and only contact law enforcement if the behavior escalates to a clear and imminent threat of physical harm. Option C. Approach the individuals directly and attempt to mediate their argument to prevent potential violence. Option D. Ignore the situation completely as it does not directly involve you and you are not obligated to intervene. The correct answer is B. Maintain a safe distance, observe the situation discreetly, and only contact law enforcement if the behavior escalates to a clear and imminent threat of physical harm. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to navigate the intersection of personal rights, public safety, and legal obligations in a dynamic situation. The core challenge lies in accurately assessing a perceived threat versus a potential misunderstanding, while also adhering to the specific legal requirements for carrying a concealed firearm in Utah. The individual must exercise sound judgment and restraint, understanding that their actions have significant legal and ethical implications. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves de-escalation and avoidance of unnecessary confrontation. This means maintaining a safe distance, observing the situation without direct engagement, and only contacting law enforcement if a genuine, immediate threat to safety is confirmed. This approach aligns with Utah law's emphasis on responsible firearm ownership and the principle of using deadly force only as a last resort when facing imminent danger of death or serious bodily injury. It prioritizes de-escalation and avoids actions that could be misconstrued as aggressive or provocative, thereby minimizing the risk of escalating a situation or creating a false sense of threat. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately drawing the firearm and confronting the individuals. This action is a direct violation of the principle of using deadly force only when absolutely necessary and imminent. It escalates the situation unnecessarily, creates a significant risk of harm to all parties involved, and could lead to criminal charges for brandishing a weapon or assault, regardless of the initial perceived threat. Utah law requires a reasonable belief of imminent danger before resorting to such measures. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the situation entirely, even if the behavior observed is clearly erratic and potentially dangerous. While avoidance is generally preferred, completely disregarding a situation that poses a clear and present danger to oneself or others could be seen as a failure to act responsibly, especially if the individual is legally carrying a concealed firearm and is capable of assessing and reporting a threat. This approach neglects the duty of care that responsible firearm carriers are expected to exercise. A third incorrect approach involves verbally confronting the individuals from a distance, demanding they cease their behavior. While not as immediately dangerous as drawing a weapon, this can still escalate the situation and provoke a negative reaction. It bypasses the opportunity for safe observation and assessment, and could lead to a confrontation that could have been avoided through more passive observation, and if necessary, reporting to authorities. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, legality, and proportionality. This involves 1. Situational awareness. Continuously assess the environment and the behavior of others. 2. Threat assessment. Objectively evaluate whether the observed behavior constitutes an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. 3. De-escalation and avoidance. Prioritize creating distance and avoiding direct confrontation whenever possible. 4. Legal compliance. Understand and adhere to Utah's concealed firearm laws, particularly regarding the use of force. 5. Reporting. If a genuine threat is confirmed and de-escalation is not possible, contact law enforcement promptly. Question 8. The review process indicates that an applicant for a Utah Concealed Firearm Permit (CFP) has a past arrest for a misdemeanor offense, though the charges were subsequently dismissed by the court. The applicant has provided a brief written explanation for the incident, stating it was a misunderstanding. What is the most appropriate course of action for the permit issuing authority? Option A. Immediately deny the permit application based on the existence of an arrest record, regardless of the dismissal. Option B. Rely solely on the applicant's written explanation and approve the permit if it seems plausible. Option C. Approve the permit application without further inquiry, assuming the dismissed charges mean the incident is irrelevant. Option D. Conduct a thorough investigation, including obtaining official records of the arrest and dismissal, and interviewing the applicant to gather further details about the incident and their understanding of firearm laws. Correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough investigation, including obtaining official records of the arrest and dismissal, and interviewing the applicant to gather further details about the incident and their understanding of firearm laws. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential conflict between a citizen's right to self-defense and the legal requirements for carrying a concealed firearm. the applicant's past behavior, while not resulting in a conviction, raises concerns about their judgment and adherence to firearm safety principles, which are central to the Utah Concealed Firearm Permit (CFP) program's goal of ensuring responsible firearm ownership. Careful judgment is required to balance the applicant's stated intent with the need to uphold public safety and the integrity of the permitting process. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to thoroughly investigate the circumstances surrounding the applicant's prior arrest and the subsequent dismissal of charges. This involves obtaining official documentation related to the arrest, including the police report and court records detailing the dismissal. The applicant should be interviewed to understand their perspective on the incident and to assess their comprehension of firearm safety and legal responsibilities. This approach is correct because Utah law, as reflected in the requirements for a CFP, mandates that the issuing authority consider an applicant's history, even if it did not result in a conviction, to determine if they are a person who may lawfully possess a firearm and can be entrusted with carrying one concealed. A comprehensive review ensures that the decision is based on all available facts and aligns with the legislative intent of the CFP program to promote public safety. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately deny the permit solely based on the arrest record, without further investigation. This is ethically and legally flawed because Utah law generally presumes innocence until proven guilty, and a dismissed charge does not equate to a finding of guilt. Denying the permit without understanding the specifics of the incident and the reasons for dismissal could be considered an arbitrary or discriminatory action. Failing to adhere to due process. Another incorrect approach is to approve the permit without any inquiry into the arrest, assuming that the dismissal of charges means the matter is irrelevant. This is professionally negligent and poses a significant risk to public safety. The underlying circumstances of the arrest, even if charges were dropped, might reveal a pattern of behavior or a lack of judgment that would disqualify an applicant under Utah's CFP requirements, which consider factors beyond just convictions. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on the applicant's verbal explanation of the incident without seeking corroborating documentation. While an interview is important, it is not a substitute for official records. This approach is insufficient because it leaves the decision vulnerable to subjective interpretation and potential misrepresentation by the applicant, failing to provide an objective basis for determining eligibility according to the standards set by Utah law. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role should employ a structured decision-making process that prioritizes thoroughness, fairness, and adherence to legal mandates. This involves 1. Identifying all relevant facts and potential disqualifiers presented in the application. 2. Conducting a comprehensive investigation that includes reviewing official records and interviewing the applicant. 3. Applying the specific criteria outlined in Utah's concealed firearm laws and administrative rules to the gathered information. 4. Documenting the entire process and the rationale for the final decision. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are well-founded, legally defensible, and serve the public interest by upholding the integrity of the firearm permitting system. Question 9. Examination of the data shows that while legally carrying a concealed firearm under a Utah Concealed Firearm Permit, you observe two individuals in a public park engaged in what appears to be a heated verbal argument. They are not physically touching, but their voices are raised, and their body language suggests significant agitation. You are approximately 50 yards away, and there are other people in the park, including families with children. At similar distance, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Continue your current activity without paying attention to the argument, assuming it is a private matter. Option B. Immediately call 911 and report a potential disturbance, requesting police intervention without further observation. Option C. Remain calm, observe the situation from your current distance, and be prepared to act only if the situation escalates to a direct threat to yourself or others. Option D. Immediately draw your concealed firearm and approach the individuals to de-escalate the situation by asserting your presence. The correct answer is C. Remain calm, observe the situation from your current distance, and be prepared to act only if the situation escalates to a direct threat to yourself or others. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a potential conflict between a citizen's right to carry a concealed firearm and the responsibility of a permit holder to act lawfully and responsibly. The challenge lies in discerning the appropriate course of action when encountering a situation that could be perceived as a threat, balancing personal safety with legal obligations and the safety of others. Careful judgment is required to avoid escalating a situation unnecessarily, while also ensuring preparedness for genuine threats. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves remaining calm, assessing the situation from a safe distance, and avoiding direct confrontation unless absolutely necessary for self-defense. This approach prioritizes de-escalation and responsible observation. Utah law, specifically Utah Code Title 76, Chapter 10, Part 5 Firearms, emphasizes lawful conduct for concealed firearm permit holders. While the permit grants the right to carry, it does not grant the right to act as an aggressor or to interfere in situations that do not pose an immediate threat to oneself or others. Remaining observant and ready to act only if a direct threat materializes aligns with the principles of responsible gun ownership and the legal framework governing concealed carry in Utah. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately draw your concealed firearm and confront the individuals. This action is a direct violation of the principles of responsible concealed carry and could be construed as an aggressive act, potentially leading to legal repercussions and escalating a non-threatening situation into a dangerous one. Utah law requires permit holders to act with restraint and to only use deadly force when necessary for self-defense. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the situation entirely and continue with your activities without any awareness. While de-escalation is important, complete disengagement without any assessment of potential risk could leave you unprepared if the situation were to escalate into a genuine threat. Responsible permit holders are expected to be aware of their surroundings. A further incorrect approach is to immediately call law enforcement and report a potential threat without first making a basic assessment of the situation. While reporting suspicious activity is often encouraged, an immediate, unsubstantiated report based solely on a perception of unease, without any observable indicators of immediate danger, can strain law enforcement resources and potentially lead to unnecessary intervention. The focus should be on observing and assessing before making a report, unless the threat is overt and immediate. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with situational awareness and assessment. This involves observing the environment, identifying potential risks, and evaluating the nature of any perceived threat. If a situation does not present an immediate danger to oneself or others, the priority is de-escalation and avoidance of confrontation. If a genuine threat emerges, the permit holder should be prepared to act within the bounds of the law, which includes using their firearm only when necessary for self-defense. In situations that are concerning but not immediately threatening, discreet observation, and if warranted, a calm and factual report to authorities are appropriate. Question 10. Upon reviewing a Utah concealed firearm permit applicant's qualification score, you observe the following data from their shooting exercise. 50 rounds were fired, and 42 rounds struck the target. The Utah CFP syllabus specifies that a minimum of 80% of rounds must hit the vital zone for qualification. If 38 of the 42 rounds that struck the target were within the vital zone, what is the applicant's final qualification percentage, and do they meet the minimum requirement? Option A. The applicant's qualification percentage is 84% and they do not meet the minimum requirement. Option B. The applicant's qualification percentage is 76% and they do not meet the minimum requirement. Option C. The applicant's qualification percentage is 84% and they meet the minimum requirement. Option D. The applicant's qualification percentage is 76% and they meet the minimum requirement. The correct answer is B. The applicant's qualification percentage is 76% and they do not meet the minimum requirement. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the accurate calculation of firearm proficiency scores under specific Utah Concealed Firearm Permit (CFP) requirements. The challenge lies in correctly interpreting the scoring rubric, applying it to a given set of performance data, and ensuring the final score meets the minimum threshold for permit eligibility. Miscalculation could lead to an incorrect assessment of the applicant's proficiency, potentially resulting in the denial of a permit to a qualified individual or the issuance of a permit to someone who may not meet the required standard. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a meticulous, step-by-step calculation of the score based on the Utah CFP syllabus's defined scoring parameters. This approach requires understanding that the syllabus specifies a minimum number of hits within a designated scoring zone. For a standard qualification course, this typically involves a set number of rounds fired at specific distances, with a minimum number of rounds hitting the target's vital area. The calculation would involve summing the points for each hit within the vital zone and comparing this total to the minimum required score. For instance, if the syllabus requires a minimum of 80% accuracy on a 50-round course, the applicant must hit the vital zone at least 40 times. The calculation would be number of hits in vital zone / total rounds fired, asterisk 100%. If this percentage meets or exceeds the minimum, the qualification is met. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to simply count the total number of rounds that hit the target paper, regardless of whether they are within the vital zone. This fails to adhere to the specific scoring criteria outlined in the Utah CFP syllabus, which mandates accuracy within a defined area for a successful qualification. Another incorrect approach would be to estimate the score based on a general impression of the shooter's performance without performing an exact count and calculation. This subjective method is unprofessional and does not provide the objective data required to verify compliance with the permit requirements. It bypasses the established, quantifiable standards. A further incorrect approach would be to only consider the number of rounds fired and assume a passing score if the applicant fired the correct number of rounds, irrespective of accuracy. The Utah CFP syllabus explicitly links qualification to accuracy, not merely participation. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a systematic and data-driven approach. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding the specific requirements and scoring metrics of the Utah CFP syllabus. 2. Carefully documenting all performance data, e.g., number of rounds fired, number of hits in the vital zone. 3. Performing precise calculations using the documented data and the syllabus's formula. 4. Verifying the calculation to ensure accuracy. This methodical process ensures fairness, compliance, and professional integrity. Question 11. When evaluating a tense verbal confrontation in a public park in Utah, where an individual is shouting aggressively at you but not physically threatening you, what is the most appropriate and legally sound course of action for a concealed firearm permit holder? Option A. Verbally confront the individual back with equal aggression, while ensuring your concealed firearm remains hidden but ready. Option B. Draw your concealed firearm and point it at the individual to intimidate them into stopping their verbal assault. Option C. Immediately and calmly disengage from the confrontation by walking away to a safe distance. Option D. Remain in the immediate area, call law enforcement to report the disturbance, and keep your firearm readily accessible. The correct answer is C. Immediately and calmly disengage from the confrontation by walking away to a safe distance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to balance their right to self-defense with the legal responsibilities and limitations placed upon concealed firearm permit holders in Utah. Misinterpreting or disregarding these limitations can lead to severe legal consequences, including the revocation of the permit and criminal charges. Careful judgment is required to assess the immediate threat and the legality of drawing a firearm in a public, non-designated area. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately disengaging from the confrontation and seeking a safe location away from the perceived threat. This approach is correct because Utah law, under the Concealed Firearm Permit Act, generally prohibits carrying a concealed firearm in certain locations. And while it allows for carrying in many public places, it does not grant a permit holder the right to draw or brandish a firearm in response to a verbal altercation or a non-imminent threat of serious bodily harm. The primary goal of a permit holder should be to avoid escalating a situation and to ensure their own safety and the safety of others by removing themselves from harm's way. Drawing a firearm in this context, without an immediate and justifiable threat of death or serious bodily injury, could be construed as unlawful brandishing or assault. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to draw the concealed firearm and point it at the individual to de-escalate the verbal argument. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Utah law requires that a permit holder only use deadly force when they reasonably believe it is necessary to prevent death or serious bodily injury to themselves or another person. A verbal argument, even if heated, does not meet this threshold. Drawing a weapon in such a situation constitutes unlawful brandishing and could lead to criminal charges, jeopardizing the permit. Another incorrect approach is to immediately call law enforcement and inform them of the situation, but remain in the immediate vicinity of the confrontation while waiting for officers to arrive, keeping the concealed firearm readily accessible. While contacting law enforcement is a responsible step, remaining at the scene of a heated verbal argument without disengaging increases the risk of escalation and potential involvement in a situation that could necessitate the use of the firearm, which may not be legally justifiable. The priority should be to create distance and ensure personal safety first. A further incorrect approach is to verbally confront the individual aggressively, while keeping the concealed firearm concealed but ready for immediate use. This approach is also professionally unacceptable. It involves engaging in a verbal confrontation, which is inherently escalatory, and maintaining a readiness to use a firearm without an immediate, justifiable threat. This demonstrates poor judgment and a failure to prioritize de-escalation and personal safety through disengagement. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes de-escalation and personal safety. This involves assessing the threat level, understanding the legal parameters of firearm use in Utah, and always seeking to disengage from potentially volatile situations. If a threat is perceived, the immediate action should be to create distance and seek a safe environment. Only when faced with an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury should the use of a firearm be considered, and even then, only within the strict confines of Utah law. Question 12. The analysis reveals that a Utah concealed firearm permit holder is walking through a dimly lit parking lot late at night and perceives an individual approaching them rapidly from a distance, exhibiting aggressive body language. The permit holder feels a sense of unease and potential danger. What is the most appropriate course of action for the permit holder to take, considering Utah's laws regarding concealed firearms and self-defense? Option A. Call law enforcement and report a suspicious person, but take no other immediate action to protect themselves until officers arrive. Option B. Assess the immediate threat level and the necessity of force, prioritizing de-escalation and avoidance if possible, but being prepared to act defensively if legally justified and unavoidable. Option C. Immediately draw their concealed firearm and confront the approaching individual to deter them. Option D. Ignore the approaching individual and continue walking, assuming the CFP allows for any perceived threat to be met with defensive readiness. Correct answer is B. Assess the immediate threat level and the necessity of force, prioritizing de-escalation and avoidance if possible, but being prepared to act defensively if legally justified and unavoidable. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a direct conflict between a citizen's right to self-defense and the legal requirements for carrying a concealed firearm. The individual is in a situation where they feel threatened, but are also aware of their legal obligations. Navigating this requires a precise understanding of Utah's concealed firearm permit, CFP laws, and the ethical considerations surrounding the use of force. The challenge lies in determining the appropriate course of action that upholds both personal safety and legal compliance. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves prioritizing immediate safety while ensuring legal compliance. This means assessing the threat level, and if the threat is immediate and unavoidable, taking defensive action that is proportionate to the threat. However, the primary focus must remain on de-escalation and avoidance if possible, and if force is used, it must be within the bounds of Utah law, specifically concerning the justifiable use of force. This approach aligns with the principles of responsible firearm ownership and the legal framework governing concealed carry in Utah, which emphasizes lawful and justified use of force. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately drawing the firearm and confronting the perceived threat without assessing the immediacy or proportionality of the danger. This fails to adhere to the legal standard for the use of force in Utah, which requires that force be necessary to prevent death or serious bodily injury. Drawing a weapon without such justification could be construed as an unlawful threat or even an assault. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the perceived threat and take no action, even if the situation escalates to a point where personal safety is genuinely at risk. While de-escalation is important, Utah law permits the use of force, including deadly force, when reasonably necessary to prevent death or serious bodily injury. Failing to act when legally justified could result in harm to oneself. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on the presence of a CFP as justification for any action taken, regardless of the circumstances. A CFP grants the privilege to carry concealed, but it does not grant immunity from the laws governing the use of force. The permit holder is still bound by the same legal standards as any other citizen regarding self-defense. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with threat assessment. Is the threat immediate, credible, and unavoidable? If so, what level of force is reasonably necessary to counter that threat, keeping in mind Utah's legal definitions of justifiable use of force? If the threat is not immediate or can be avoided through other means, de-escalation and disengagement should be prioritized. The presence of a CFP is a privilege, not a license to act with impunity. It requires a heightened awareness of legal responsibilities and ethical considerations. Question 13. Comparative studies suggest that responsible firearm ownership involves a deep understanding of legal requirements. An individual in Utah holds a valid concealed firearm permit, CFP, that is set to expire in 2 weeks. They have initiated the online renewal process, but have not yet received confirmation or a new permit card. Believing that the renewal is in progress, they continue to carry their concealed firearm. Which of the following actions best reflects adherence to Utah's firearm laws and responsible permit management? Option A. Continue carrying the concealed firearm, assuming the permit is still valid until the physical card's expiration date, even if renewal has not been finalized. Option B. Cease carrying the concealed firearm immediately and only resume carrying after receiving official confirmation and a renewed concealed firearm permit. Option C. Continue carrying the concealed firearm, as the renewal application has been submitted and is in process. Option D. Carry the firearm openly, as the concealed firearm permit has expired, and open carry does not require a permit. The correct answer is B. Cease carrying the concealed firearm immediately and only resume carrying after receiving official confirmation and a renewed concealed firearm permit. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to balance their right to self-defense with the legal obligations and responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed firearm in Utah. The core challenge lies in understanding the nuances of when and where a concealed firearm can be legally carried, and the critical importance of maintaining awareness of one's surroundings and the legal status of their permit. Misinterpreting or disregarding these factors can lead to serious legal consequences, including permit revocation and criminal charges. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a proactive and informed stance on permit renewal and firearm carriage. This means understanding that a concealed firearm permit, CFP, in Utah has an expiration date, and that carrying a concealed firearm after this date, even if the intent to renew was present, is a violation of Utah law. The correct approach is to cease carrying a concealed firearm immediately upon the expiration of the permit, and to only resume carrying after the permit has been officially renewed and received. This aligns with Utah Code Title 76, Chapter 10, Part 5, which governs concealed firearm permits and their validity. The law requires a valid permit to carry concealed, and an expired permit is not valid. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to continue carrying a concealed firearm based on the belief that the renewal application has been submitted and is in process. This is a failure to adhere to the explicit legal requirement of possessing a valid permit at all times while carrying concealed. Utah law does not provide a grace period for carrying with an expired permit, regardless of the renewal status. The legal authority to carry is contingent on the permit being active. Another incorrect approach is to assume that the permit is still valid because the physical card has not yet expired, despite having received notification of its impending expiration and not having completed the renewal process. The expiration date on the permit is the definitive legal cutoff. Relying on a subjective interpretation of validity or assuming an extension without official confirmation is a direct contravention of the law. A third incorrect approach is to carry the firearm openly, believing this circumvents the concealed firearm permit requirement. While Utah law does permit open carry in certain circumstances without a CFP, the question specifically pertains to the renewal of a concealed firearm permit. If the intent is to carry concealed and the CFP has expired, then carrying concealed is illegal. Open carry, while potentially legal in some contexts, does not address the core issue of the expired CFP and the legal implications of carrying a firearm. Furthermore, if the individual's intent was to carry concealed, and they are now open carrying due to an expired CFP, they are still operating under a flawed premise regarding their legal firearm carriage rights. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Utah who hold or intend to hold a concealed firearm permit must prioritize understanding and adhering to the specific legal requirements for permit validity and firearm carriage. This involves diligent tracking of permit expiration dates, proactive engagement with the renewal process well in advance of expiration, and a clear understanding that carrying a concealed firearm is only permissible when in possession of a currently valid permit. When in doubt about the validity of a permit, the safest and most legally sound decision is to refrain from carrying a concealed firearm until the permit's active status is confirmed. Question 14. The investigation demonstrates that, while legally possessing a concealed firearm permit, CFP, in Utah, you enter a private retail store and notice a clearly posted sign at the entrance stating "No firearms allowed." What is the most legally sound and professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Immediately and respectfully leave the premises with your concealed firearm. Option B. Conceal your firearm more effectively and proceed into the store, assuming the sign is merely a suggestion. Option C. Leave your firearm unsecured in your vehicle parked in the store's lot and enter the store. Option D. Enter the store and attempt to speak with the manager to explain your right to carry a concealed firearm. The correct answer is A. Immediately and respectfully leave the premises with your concealed firearm. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a common challenge faced by concealed firearm permit holders in Utah, navigating the nuances of carrying a firearm in a private establishment that has posted signage prohibiting firearms. The professional challenge lies in balancing the legal right to carry concealed firearm with the property owner's right to restrict firearms on their premises, and understanding the legal ramifications of noncompliance. Careful judgment is required to avoid criminal charges and potential revocation of the permit. The best professional practice involves immediately and respectfully complying with the posted signage. This approach acknowledges the property owner's right to set rules for their establishment and avoids any potential legal conflict. Utah law, specifically Utah Code Section 76-10-523, addresses the prohibition of carrying firearms in certain locations. While a CFP holder may generally carry concealed, this right is not absolute and can be superseded by specific prohibitions on private property, especially when clearly communicated through signage. Adhering to such signage is a matter of respecting private property rights and avoiding potential violations of law that could lead to arrest, fines, and the loss of one's permit. An incorrect approach involves ignoring the signage and proceeding into the establishment with a concealed firearm. This directly violates the property owner's stated prohibition and could be construed as trespassing with a prohibited weapon, depending on the specific circumstances and how the law is interpreted in relation to the signage. This action disregards the legal authority of the property owner to control their premises and carries significant legal risks. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to conceal the firearm more effectively or to argue with the establishment staff about the legality of the signage. This demonstrates a misunderstanding of the law and the rights of property owners. The focus should be on compliance, not on finding loopholes or engaging in confrontation. The law in Utah generally requires adherence to posted prohibitions, and attempting to circumvent them is a legally precarious position. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and de-escalation. Upon encountering signage prohibiting firearms, the immediate professional response should be to assess the situation, confirm the prohibition, and then make a decision to either leave the premises with the firearm or secure the firearm in a legally permissible manner elsewhere before entering. This proactive approach minimizes risk and upholds both legal obligations and responsible firearm ownership. Question 15. Analysis of a situation in Utah where an individual approaches you, a concealed firearm permit CFP holder, in a public park and aggressively questions why you are carrying a firearm, stating they feel unsafe. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant response? Option A. Ignore the individual and walk away quickly without any verbal interaction. Option B. Immediately draw your firearm and instruct the individual to stop and identify themselves, explaining you are exercising your right to carry. Option C. Engage the individual by asking them why they are concerned and what their intentions are. Option D. Calmly state that you are a Utah concealed firearm permit holder legally carrying a firearm, but you are not a law enforcement officer and have no authority to detain or question them. The correct answer is D. Calmly state that you are a Utah concealed firearm permit holder legally carrying a firearm, but you are not a law enforcement officer and have no authority to detain or question them. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a direct conflict between a citizen's perceived right to self-defense and the legal requirements for carrying a concealed firearm in Utah. The individual's emotional state and potential misinterpretation of the law create a situation where immediate, legally sound action is paramount to prevent potential legal repercussions for both the individual and the permit holder. The permit holder must exercise sound judgment, prioritizing adherence to Utah law over personal feelings or assumptions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to immediately and calmly inform the individual that you are a Utah concealed firearm permit holder and that you are legally carrying a firearm, while also stating that you are not a law enforcement officer and do not have any authority to detain or question them. This approach directly addresses the individual's concern by clarifying your status and intent, while strictly adhering to Utah Code Section 76-10-523, which outlines the rights and responsibilities of CFP holders. It avoids any action that could be construed as unlawful detention or impersonation of an officer, which are serious offenses. This approach prioritizes de-escalation and legal compliance. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately draw your firearm and instruct the individual to stop and identify themselves. This is a severe violation of Utah law. While a CFP holder is legally permitted to carry a concealed firearm, they are not authorized to act as a law enforcement officer. Drawing a weapon and demanding identification constitutes unlawful detention and potentially impersonation of a law enforcement officer, which carries significant criminal penalties under Utah Code Section 76-8-111 and Section 76-10-523. This action escalates the situation unnecessarily and creates a dangerous legal liability. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the individual completely and continue walking away without any acknowledgement. While this avoids direct confrontation, it fails to address the individual's immediate concern and could leave them feeling threatened or suspicious, potentially leading them to contact law enforcement with a misconstrued report. Furthermore, it misses an opportunity to clarify your legal status and de-escalate the situation through a brief, lawful statement. A third incorrect approach is to verbally engage the individual by asking them why they are concerned and what their intentions are, without clarifying your own status as a CFP holder. This opens the door to misinterpretation and could lead the individual to believe you are questioning them in an official capacity, or conversely, that you are also concerned about their presence without a clear understanding of your legal right to be armed. This approach lacks the clarity and legal grounding necessary for de-escalation and compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance, de-escalation, and clear communication. First, assess the immediate threat level. Second, recall and apply relevant state statutes regarding firearm carry and citizen interactions. Third, communicate clearly and concisely, stating only what is legally permissible and necessary to de-escalate. Fourth, avoid any actions that could be construed as exceeding legal authority or impersonating law enforcement. The goal is to resolve the encounter safely and legally, minimizing risk to oneself and others. Question 16. Consider a scenario where you are legally carrying a concealed firearm in Utah with a valid concealed firearm permit, CFP. While shopping in a grocery store, you observe two individuals behaving in a manner that makes you feel uneasy and potentially threatened, though they have not directly threatened you or anyone else. They are speaking loudly and looking around the store frequently. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action? Option A. Approach the individuals directly and ask them what they are doing and why they are behaving in such a manner. Option B. Discreetly disengage from the situation by moving to a different aisle and immediately contact law enforcement to report your concerns. Option C. Draw your concealed firearm and instruct the individuals to leave the store, stating that you are a permit holder and they are making you uncomfortable. Option D. Ignore the individuals and continue your shopping as if nothing is happening, assuming they pose no real danger. Correct answer is B. Discreetly disengage from the situation by moving to a different aisle and immediately contact law enforcement to report your concerns. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to navigate the intersection of personal rights, public safety, and the specific legal requirements for carrying a concealed firearm in Utah. The individual's perception of a threat, while potentially valid, must be assessed against objective legal standards and the practicalities of permit requirements. Misinterpreting the situation or acting outside the scope of the law can lead to serious legal consequences, including the revocation of a concealed firearm permit, CFP, and potential criminal charges. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between a perceived threat and a situation that legally justifies drawing a firearm, especially when a CFP is involved. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to disengage from the situation and contact law enforcement if the individual feels threatened but does not have a clear and present danger that necessitates immediate defensive action. This approach prioritizes de-escalation and adherence to Utah law, which generally permits carrying a concealed firearm for self-defense, but does not grant a license to act as an enforcer or to draw a weapon based solely on suspicion or perceived, non-imminent threat. Utah law requires that a person must have a reasonable belief that they are in imminent danger of death or serious bodily injury to be justified in using deadly force. Drawing a firearm without such imminent danger, even if later justified by a perceived threat, can still be problematic if it escalates the situation or is perceived as an aggressive act. Contacting law enforcement allows trained professionals to assess and manage the situation, ensuring that any response is legally sound and proportionate. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to draw the firearm and confront the individuals, demanding they leave the area. This action goes beyond the scope of a CFP, which is for carrying a concealed firearm for self-defense, not for policing or confronting others based on suspicion. Utah law does not authorize a permit holder to act as a vigilante. Such an action could be construed as brandishing a weapon unlawfully, potentially leading to criminal charges and the revocation of the CFP, regardless of the individual's subsequent actions. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the individuals and continue with the shopping trip, assuming they are not a threat. While de-escalation is important, completely disregarding a situation that causes a reasonable person to feel threatened, especially in a public place, could be a missed opportunity to ensure personal safety or to report potentially concerning behavior to authorities. While not as immediately problematic as drawing a weapon, it fails to address the individual's legitimate concern for safety and the potential for the situation to escalate. A further incorrect approach is to immediately call the police and report the individuals as suspicious, without any specific observable behavior that indicates a threat. While reporting suspicious activity is encouraged, doing so without concrete reasons can lead to unnecessary police intervention and potentially stigmatize innocent individuals. The focus should be on reporting behavior that suggests a genuine threat, not simply the presence of individuals who are perceived as different or out of place. Professional reasoning. Professionals carrying a concealed firearm in Utah should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, legality, and de-escalation. This involves 1. Situational awareness, continuously assessing the environment for potential threats. 2. Threat assessment, objectively evaluating whether a situation presents an imminent danger of death or serious bodily injury, as defined by Utah law. 3. Legal compliance, understanding the rights and responsibilities associated with a CFP, particularly the justification for drawing or using a firearm. 4. De-escalation and disengagement, prioritizing non-confrontational methods to resolve or avoid dangerous situations. 5. Law enforcement interaction, knowing when and how to contact and cooperate with law enforcement. In any situation where a person feels threatened but the danger is not imminent, the professional course of action is to disengage and report to the authorities. Question 17. During the evaluation of a tense confrontation in a Salt Lake City parking lot, a concealed firearm permit holder in Utah perceives a growing sense of unease as an individual aggressively approaches their vehicle, shouting and gesturing wildly. The individual has not yet made physical contact or displayed a weapon, but their behavior is intimidating and erratic. The permit holder is alone and feels increasingly vulnerable. Considering Utah's legal framework for the use of force, What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the permit holder? Option A. Attempt to drive away from the situation immediately, even if it means potentially striking the approaching individual with the vehicle. Option B. Immediately draw their concealed firearm to deter the aggressive individual and create a buffer zone for personal safety. Option C. Exit the vehicle and verbally confront the aggressive individual to de-escalate the situation through direct communication. Option D. Assess the situation for an imminent threat of serious bodily harm or death, considering all reasonable options for de-escalation or escape before considering drawing their concealed firearm. Correct answer is D. Assess the situation for an imminent threat of serious bodily harm or death, considering all reasonable options for de-escalation or escape before considering drawing their concealed firearm. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their right to self-defense with the legal obligations and responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed firearm in Utah. The challenge lies in understanding the nuances of Utah law regarding the permissible use of deadly force and the specific circumstances under which a concealed firearm permit holder can legally draw their weapon. Misinterpreting these laws can lead to severe legal consequences, including criminal charges, even if the individual believes they are acting in self-defense. Careful judgment is required to assess the immediate threat and determine if the use of force is justified and legally permissible. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding of Utah's self-defense statutes, specifically Utah Code Section 76-2-402, which outlines the justifiable use of force. This approach emphasizes assessing the imminence of serious bodily harm or death and the reasonableness of the belief that such harm is unavoidable. A permit holder must recognize that drawing a firearm is a significant escalation and should only be considered when all other reasonable means of escape or de-escalation have been exhausted, and the threat is immediate and severe. The legal justification for drawing a weapon hinges on the reasonable belief that it is necessary to prevent death or serious bodily injury to oneself or another. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves drawing the firearm solely based on a feeling of unease or a perceived future threat. This fails to meet the legal standard of imminence required by Utah law. Another incorrect approach is to draw the firearm in response to a verbal altercation or a non-violent physical confrontation, as this does not constitute a threat of serious bodily harm or death. Furthermore, drawing a firearm to intimidate or assert dominance, rather than for immediate self-preservation, is a clear violation of the law and ethical firearm handling principles. These approaches disregard the legal framework governing the use of force and the responsibilities of a concealed firearm permit holder. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves continuous education on relevant laws, such as Utah's self-defense statutes and concealed carry regulations. When faced with a potentially threatening situation, the process should involve 1. Objectively assessing the immediate threat level, focusing on imminence and severity. 2. Evaluating all available options for de-escalation or escape. 3. If force becomes necessary, ensuring the belief that it is required to prevent death or serious bodily injury is reasonable and justifiable under Utah law. And 4. Understanding that drawing a firearm is a last resort and carries significant legal and ethical implications. Question 18. Research into Utah's Concealed Firearm Permit, CFP, regulations reveals that permit holders are expected to interact with law enforcement in a specific manner during traffic stops. If a Utah CFP holder is lawfully stopped by a police officer and is carrying a concealed firearm, what is the legally mandated and professionally advisable course of action regarding the firearm and permit? Option A. Immediately and politely inform the officer that you are carrying a firearm and that you possess a valid Utah concealed firearm permit. Option B. Only disclose the firearm and permit after the officer has discovered the firearm through a search or other means. Option C. Argue with the officer that you are not obligated to disclose the firearm or permit due to your constitutional rights. Option D. Remain silent about the firearm and permit unless the officer specifically asks if you are carrying a weapon. The correct answer is A. Immediately and politely inform the officer that you are carrying a firearm and that you possess a valid Utah concealed firearm permit. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate a situation where their personal beliefs might conflict with legal obligations regarding firearm possession. The core of the challenge lies in understanding the precise legal boundaries of carrying a concealed firearm in Utah, particularly when encountering law enforcement, and knowing when and how to disclose the permit. Misinterpreting these requirements can lead to serious legal consequences, including the potential loss of the permit and criminal charges. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a clear understanding of Utah's concealed firearm permit laws and acting in accordance with them. This means knowing that, while Utah law generally permits permit holders to carry concealed firearms, specific circumstances, such as being stopped by a law enforcement officer, require disclosure. The correct approach is to immediately and politely inform the officer that you are carrying a firearm and that you possess a valid Utah concealed firearm permit. This proactive disclosure demonstrates compliance with the law and fosters transparency with law enforcement, which is crucial for de-escalation and ensuring safety for all parties involved. Utah Code Section 76-10-528 mandates that a person carrying a concealed firearm under a permit must, upon demand of a peace officer, produce the permit and identify themselves. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to remain silent and not disclose the firearm or permit to the officer. This directly violates Utah Code Section 76-10-528, which requires disclosure upon demand by a peace officer. Failure to do so can result in penalties, including the revocation of the permit and potential misdemeanor charges. It also creates a dangerous situation for the officer, who may perceive the individual as a threat if the firearm is discovered unexpectedly. Another incorrect approach is to only disclose the firearm after the officer has already discovered it through a search or other means. While disclosure might eventually occur, delaying it until discovery is not proactive and can be interpreted as an attempt to conceal the firearm, undermining the spirit of the law and potentially raising suspicion. The law emphasizes immediate and voluntary disclosure. A third incorrect approach is to argue with the officer about the necessity of disclosure, citing personal beliefs about the right to privacy or the Second Amendment. While these are important rights, they do not supersede specific statutory requirements for permit holders when interacting with law enforcement during a lawful stop. The legal obligation to disclose is a condition of carrying a concealed firearm under a permit in Utah. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and safety. This involves 1. Understanding and internalizing the specific legal requirements of the Utah concealed firearm permit, particularly regarding interactions with law enforcement. 2. Prioritizing transparency and cooperation with law enforcement during lawful stops. 3. Recognizing that personal beliefs, while valid, must be balanced with legal obligations. 4. Acting proactively to inform the officer of the firearm and permit, rather than waiting for discovery or confrontation. Question 19. Strategic planning requires a Utah Concealed Firearm Permit, CFP, holder to consider all applicable laws and regulations. If a CFP holder is attending a community event held at a public park in Utah, and they are aware that a specific section of the park is designated as a gun-free zone due to its proximity to a youth sports field, what is the most appropriate course of action for the CFP holder? Option A. Carry their concealed firearm into the gun-free zone and openly question the validity of the gun-free zone signage with event organizers. Option B. Carry their concealed firearm into the gun-free zone, believing that their CFP grants them the right to carry anywhere within public spaces. Option C. Refrain from carrying their concealed firearm into the designated gun-free zone within the park, even if they believe the prohibition is unnecessary for their personal safety in that specific area. Option D. Conceal their firearm more effectively to avoid detection within the gun-free zone, assuming that as long as it is not seen, it does not violate the spirit of the law. Correct answer is C. Refrain from carrying their concealed firearm into the designated gun-free zone within the park, even if they believe the prohibition is unnecessary for their personal safety in that specific area. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential conflict between personal beliefs and legal obligations, as well as the responsibility to uphold the law while ensuring public safety. The individual must navigate their right to carry a concealed firearm with the specific requirements and limitations imposed by Utah law for permit holders. Misinterpreting or disregarding these regulations can lead to serious legal consequences and compromise the safety of themselves and others. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves understanding and strictly adhering to the provisions of Utah Code annotated Title 76, Chapter 10, Part 5, which governs concealed firearm permits. Specifically, this means recognizing that while a CFP allows for concealed carry, it does not grant permission to carry a firearm into locations where it is explicitly prohibited by state law, regardless of personal belief about the effectiveness of such prohibitions. The permit holder's responsibility is to know and follow these legal restrictions, such as those pertaining to schools, courthouses, and federal buildings, as outlined in Utah Code. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and public safety over personal interpretation of the law. Incorrect approach is analysis. Carrying a firearm into a prohibited location based on a personal belief that the prohibition is ineffective or infringes on rights is a direct violation of Utah Code. This demonstrates a failure to understand or respect the legal framework established for public safety and the regulation of firearms. It prioritizes individual interpretation over established law, which is professionally unacceptable for a permit holder. Attempting to conceal the firearm in a prohibited location without acknowledging the prohibition is also a violation. The act of carrying the firearm into the prohibited area itself is the offense, regardless of whether it is openly displayed or concealed. This approach shows a disregard for the law and an attempt to circumvent its clear intent. Assuming that a CFP somehow overrides specific location-based prohibitions is a fundamental misunderstanding of the permit's scope. The permit grants the privilege to carry concealed under specific conditions, but it does not grant a blanket exemption from all firearm restrictions in all locations within Utah. This demonstrates a lack of knowledge regarding the limitations of the permit. Professional reasoning. Professionals in possession of a CFP in Utah must adopt a decision-making process rooted in a thorough understanding of Utah Code annotated Title 76, Chapter 10, Part 5. This involves proactive education on prohibited locations and circumstances, regular review of any updates to the law, and a commitment to prioritizing legal compliance. When faced with uncertainty about whether a location is prohibited, the professional decision is to err on the side of caution and refrain from carrying a firearm into that location, or to seek clarification from official sources before doing so. This ensures responsible firearm ownership and upholds the integrity of the CFP system. Question 20. Governance review demonstrates that an applicant for a Utah Concealed Firearm Permit, CFP, lists the following firearms and their associated standard magazine capacities: a 9mm handgun with a 15-round magazine, a 45 caliber handgun with a 10-round magazine, and a 22 caliber pistol with a 20-round magazine, based on Utah Code Section 76-10-523-3. B. What is the maximum number of rounds of ammunition the applicant can legally possess for these firearms, assuming no special exemptions for standard capacity magazines beyond the statutory limit? Option A, 36 rounds. Option B, 32 rounds. Option C, 45 rounds. Option D, 20 rounds. The correct answer is A, 36 rounds. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge by requiring the applicant to accurately calculate the total number of rounds of ammunition they are legally permitted to possess for concealed carry purposes in Utah, based on specific statutory limitations. Misinterpreting or miscalculating these limits could lead to an applicant unknowingly exceeding legal thresholds, potentially jeopardizing their permit application or future compliance. Careful judgment is required to apply the statutory limits correctly to the given quantities. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a precise calculation of the total ammunition capacity across all listed firearms, adhering strictly to Utah Code Section 76-10-523-3. B. This statute limits the number of rounds of ammunition a permit holder may possess to no more than 13 rounds per firearm, unless the firearm is a standard capacity magazine for that particular firearm model. The calculation should sum the maximum legal capacity for each firearm, considering the 13-round limit or the standard capacity if applicable and demonstrably so. For the 9mm handgun with a 15-round magazine, the legal limit is 13 rounds. For the .45 caliber handgun with a 10-round magazine, the limit is 10 rounds. For the .22 caliber pistol with a 20-round magazine, the legal limit is 13 rounds. The total is /13 plus 10 plus 13 equals 36 rounds. This approach is correct because it directly applies the statutory language to the facts, ensuring compliance with the specific numerical limitations set forth by Utah law for ammunition possession by permit holders. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to sum the stated magazine capacities of all firearms without considering the statutory 13-round limit. This would result in /15 plus 10 plus 20 equals 45 rounds. This approach fails because it ignores the explicit legal restriction on ammunition possession, treating the magazine capacity as the sole determinant of legal possession, which is contrary to Utah Code Section 76-10-523(3). B. Another incorrect approach is to only consider the largest magazine capacity and assume that is the limit for all firearms. This would lead to a calculation of 20 rounds, or, if applying the 13-round limit to the largest magazine, 13 rounds. This is incorrect because Utah law applies the limit on a per-firearm basis, not as a single aggregate limit for all firearms. A further incorrect approach is to sum the magazine capacities and then subtract the 13-round limit from the total. This would yield /4513 equals 32 rounds. This is incorrect because the 13-round limit is applied to each individual firearm's ammunition capacity, not to the aggregate total of all ammunition possessed. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such calculations by first identifying the relevant statute, Utah Code Section 76-10-523(3). B. Then, they must meticulously break down the problem, applying the statutory limit to each individual firearm and its associated ammunition. This involves understanding that the limit is per firearm, and that standard capacity exceptions require specific justification not provided in the general scenario. The process should be one of careful, step-by-step application of the law to the given facts, ensuring no part of the statute is overlooked.